Michael A. Stackpole originally planned on writing the Dark Tide trilogy, but the middle volume, Siege, was cancelled and its plot points redistributed to the final volume, Dark Tide Ruin. This allowed Del Rey to stretch James Luceno's Agents of Chaos from one book to two. Dark Tide Onslaught made it to number 14 on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for 2 straight weeks, from the week of February 20th to the week of February 27th, 2000, and was ultimately on the list for 3 weeks. I found that around half of Dark Tide Onslaught was familiar to me. Some aspects of it, like Anakin and Mara's time on Dantooine or Jacen's misadventures on Belkaden, felt very familiar, but other bits, like Jaina joining Rogue Squadron, didn't trigger that same sense of déjà vu. I had stopped doing the costume count for pretty much the tail end of the Bantam era books because it felt a little sad to be continuously pointing out that there were no notable costumes mentioned in the book. But I felt like Stackpole knew what I was looking for here and gave me what I wanted. When Leia appears before the Senate, she's wearing a very nice warrior costume of a blue tunic, black pants and boots, and her hair up. And then when she appears before the council at Agamar, she's wearing robes embroidered with waves because that's something significant to their local culture. Corran's wearing the traditional Corellian Jedi robes, which would have made both his grandfathers proud. And Ganner Rhysode has his own Jedi robes as well that are very spiffy looking, so yes, many good costumes here. So, a brief summary. As refugees from Duberlon flee from the incoming Yuuzhan Vong forces, our Jedi heroes face a relentless foe who seeks to smother forever the light of the New Republic. A lot of the characters in this book are paired off on missions, so I thought I'd tackle them as groups. So first we have Luke Skywalker and Jacen Solo. Luke is still struggling to unite his Jedi Knights, still wants to form a Jedi Council but hasn't been given permission to do so. He does, however, recall all the Jedi back to Yavin 4 and assign them various intel jobs to do. He pairs them up and sends them out to investigate what's happening in the Outer Rim, where the Yuuzhan Vong are, and what they're doing. And he pairs himself with his nephew, Jacen. Jacen is still struggling with his role in the Jedi Order, his view of the Force, and how that all works together. And that's actually a part that I really like about Jacen. I like that he questions things. I like that he's always searching and thinking, because it feels like a very teenage attitude to me. For a lot of people, your teenage years is when you first start to question the world and your place within it. So while sometimes the Solo children feel much too old to me, Jacen's philosophical struggles are actually the one thing that feels most like a 16-year-old. Luke gives himself perhaps one of the most important missions to go back to Belkaden and see what the Yuuzhan Vong are doing there. Why did they terraform the world? What was their purpose? As Luke and Jacen quickly find out, the purpose was to build a biological factory for their coral skippers and Dovin basiles and their other biotech elements. Luke and Jacen discover that the Yuuzhan Vong are using slave labor, in particular, people from within their own galaxy that they've captured and they're using in this awful way. And Jacen has a vision or a dream that shows himself freeing all the slaves. He heads out in the middle of the night to fulfill his vision, only to find out that things didn't turn out like he dreamed them. He fails to free the slaves. They're scared of him. A Yuuzhan Vong warrior comes out, knocks Jacen out, and when he comes to, he's in this horrible rack. And it looks very much like Jacen's going to become a slave himself. Fortunately, Luke gets 2 really good action action scenes in this book, and the first is freeing Jacen. He fights with 2 lightsabers, which is something I've always loved. It's one of the things I liked most about the Clone Wars is that Ahsoka had 2 lightsabers. It's a really good fight scene, but we also see how using the Force in such a brute force way drains him. What Luke had found out during the Hand of Thrawn duology is that if you want to use the Force for guidance, you have to sort of step back from those great feats. And so in this book, we see that when he does use the Force in a very powerful way, there's consequences afterwards. The second amazing Luke battle scene, of course, is at the very end during the Battle of Dantooine, when, thanks to some comments from his nephews, he figures out that while the Jedi can't use the Force on the Yuuzhan Vong, they can maybe use the Force to affect other things. So Luke essentially uses the Force to make a Dovin vassal swallow an entire Yuuzhan Vong craft. It's an amazing display, but like with his rescue of his nephew, it drains him. He's not able to do anything else really for the rest of the battle. Likewise, Anakin Solo has been paired off with his aunt, Mara Jade. They're sent to Dantooine in hopes that Mara can recuperate a little bit from her mysterious illness. And like Luke in the Hand of Thrawn duology, Anakin really gets a lesson in the difference between superficial use of the Force and perhaps more important essential use of the Force. Instead of using the Force to get your tent raised, it makes a lot more sense to actually do that yourself, because then you can save that power, that effort for greater things. I did find it a little strange, though, that Mara went from being so completely tired and fatigued by her illness to, during the Battle of Dantooine, being able to help Leia seek out Yuuzhan Vong's saboteurs, but I can sort of wave that off as plot necessity. She needed to be weak earlier so we could see the connection between her illness and the Yuuzhan Vong, but she needed to be strong towards the end to help Leia out. And then we see the return of one of Michael A. Stackpole's most popular characters, Corran Horn. Since the Hand of Thrawn duology, he has quit Rogue Squadron, joined the Jedi Order, and is pretty much operating as a Jedi full-time. When I first met Corran in Rogue Squadron, his attitude irritated me so much because he was so arrogant and unwilling to consider other people and other points of view. But he's mellowed out a lot in the intervening years and the intervening books. So by the time we get to Dark Tide Onslaught, actually I really like Corran. He's paired off with one of Kype Durran's proteges, I guess. Ganner Rhysode. Ganner's a Jedi who thinks that he knows best. The Force should be used for everything. He doesn't need to consult other people. And Corran's trying to show him how that's maybe not the best approach to take. They're sent to a world to check to make sure that archaeological team from a university is okay, and they run into Yuuzhan Vong. They also run into slaves. They also run into how will they deal with this. And their storyline concludes with they head there with a plan to take out the Yuuzhan Vong and rescue 2 of the university students who have been captured. Ganner escapes with the students, but Corran faces the 2 Yuuzhan Vong warriors in a one-on-one battle. He takes out the first one because of a trick, mainly being his dual-phase lightsaber. And then the second one is actually a pretty good fight. It's really hard on both of them, and the only reason Corran wins is because he remembers something that his son had showed him earlier on in the book. Leia, meanwhile, is doing diplomatic things. She appears before Borsk Fey'lya in the Senate to ask for support in the fight against the Yuuzhan Vong, and she's pretty much turned away. So most of Leia's plotline involves Leia, Elegos, her daughter Jaina Solo, and the scientist Danny Kui. First, they head to Agamar to ask for support. both military support, but most importantly, support for the incoming refugees. After speaking at Agmar, Leia returns to Dubrelon, only to find out that things have gone very wrong there, and Lando's trying to evacuate everyone. Rogue Squadron and Admiral Crayfay show up. Rogue Squadron needs more pilots. Jaina ends up joining Rogue Squadron, and Dani gets to work on her Force skills a little. I liked Leia appearing before the Senate. I liked how frustrated and angry you could tell she was becoming, but because she's a diplomat, she keeps that in and she doesn't take that out on anyone. I was a little less happy with how Leia strong-armed Gavin Darklighter into letting Jaina join Rogue Squadron. She seemed to be laying on a lot of guilt about how he was just keeping her out because she was Princess Leia's daughter. And I was like, Leia, that's not necessary. I think that Jaina can stand on her own merits, mainly that she's an amazing pilot, and that should be enough. And I liked how excited Jaina was to join Rogue Squadron. I liked how one of the aspects of the Battle of Dantooine was her idea, and that it worked so well. And after his sad ending in Isard's Revenge, I was happy to see that Gavin Darklighter is thriving here. He was so serious about becoming a father that he adopted 2 orphans. He ended up marrying the social worker who helped with his adoption. He has 5 kids now, and he's the commander of Rogue Squadron. Good for you, Gavin. I'm glad you're doing so well. I also wonder if the unnamed, unorthodox instructor who taught Admiral Crayfay at the Bothan Martial Academy is perhaps meant to be Asir Sylar in her new identity, since that seemed to be what she wanted to do at the end of Isard's Revenge. Of course, that's not confirmed. I googled it. That's not confirmed anywhere, but I would like to think that that is so. And then we have our bad guys. Unlike in Vector Prime, we don't get anything from a Yuuzhan Vong point of view until the epilogue. Instead, the main opposition standing in the way of our heroes putting together a strong, effective defense against the Yuuzhan Vong at this point is Borsk Fey'lya and the Senate. Borsk is leery of committing to any action. He's very distrustful of the Jedi, and he suspects that Leia is making a power play here in trying to get back her old authority. So while that's frustrating that the New Republic at this stage in the books just isn't addressing this problem, it also sort of lends to that feeling of rebels versus an evil empire in essence, if not in name. While I enjoyed this reread of Dark Tide Onslaught, there were also, as always, some things that I took issue with. Number one is that whenever Luke and Mara talk to each other, their conversation just didn't quite sound right to me. And if I were to pinpoint what I felt was wrong, it was Mara. Her voice just sounded weird. And actually, the more I thought about it, the more Luke and Mara talking to each other in a romantic manner sounded a lot like how Corran and Mirax would talk to each other in the Rogue Squadron books. So I don't know if Stackpole just only has one way to write romantic scenes, but Mara's voice sounded off there. She didn't sound off in her scenes with Anakin, but she sounded off in her interactions with her husband. It felt a little too. There were some possibly exciting battles that we just missed out on, either because of wanting to prolong suspense or because Stackpole didn't want the book to get too long. Essentially, I'm thinking of when Leia returns to Dubrelon and finds that apparently the Vong have been constantly attacking it, and Lando has finally decided to evacuate everyone because it's completely ruined. That was something I felt like I might have liked to see, because where we left off in Vector Prime, I didn't get the sense that Dubrelon was completely ruined at that point. And then at the final battle of Dantooine at the end, while I felt like we got a lot into Luke and Jacen and Anakin's actions during the battle, We didn't get so much of what the ships were doing, so that it came as a surprise at the end when we learned that half of Rogue Squadron was gone, and the 2 squadrons composed of uglies were almost completely decimated. In a similar way, I would have liked to see more of the Jedi missions that Luke dispatched them on, but I could understand why Stackpole chose to keep it to just Luke's team, Mara's team, Corran's team, and what Leia was doing, because not every book has to be 600 plus pages. I also question why no one had tried to parley with the Vong at this point, because Leia and Elagos are diplomats. Surely they would try to have discourse with the enemy and see if ceasefire or peace was at all possible. But this was another instance where I'm pretty sure I remember that this is addressed in book 2, so I'm fine with that being left out. I did find, though, that for Luke and Jacen and Corran and Ganner's missions, there were too many similarities, at least initially. Both of them discover that the Yuuzhan Vong are using slaves. The younger men want to save the slaves. The older men go, we don't have enough people, we can't address that right now. And while their plots did eventually diverge, especially what happened with Luke and Jacen on Belkadin, I just wondered why they both had to make the same revelations. It just seemed a little too repetitive to me. And ultimately, I found that with no Vong perspective until the very end, I very much missed that and felt like that was essential for us to try to understand their characters. In Vector Prime, thanks to Yeoman Carr and Nominor, we were introduced to the Vong, as incomplete as that introduction may have been. And while we learned a little bit more about their society in this book, mainly that they use slaves in a very callous manner, and that they're obsessed with pain. And most importantly, something that was never outright said in Vector Prime, that the Yuuzhan Vong aren't in the Force or are outside of the Force. Without their perspective, it's really hard to come to an understanding of them. And so they're like, bad guys. And it's sort of surface level at this point. We haven't dug deeper into their characters. But with the addition of Shadow Shy's perspective in the epilogue, I hope that we will get more insight into their characters, because they're like violent ciphers at this point. So, in short, I thought that Dark Tide Onslaught was a good follow-up to Vector Prime. I really liked what happened with a lot of our Jedi characters, mainly Corran and Ganner, Luke and Jacen, and Mara and Anakin. It was perhaps a little too short in the end, because there were some things that I thought could have been fleshed out better, but I'm hopeful that book 2 will address those issues and hopefully build on what this book has created. So next time, I am technically not reading a New Jedi Order novel. Instead, I'm reading a tangentially related prequel novel, Rogue Planet by Greg Bear.